Our paper is called Algorithmic Management, Reimagined for Workers and by Workers, Centering Worker Well-Being in Gig Work. This is the work of Angie, Zhang, Alexander Boltz, Chun-Wei, Wang, and Kyung Lee. Algorithmic management refers to the practice where rather than human managers, workers are managed by software algorithms or automated platforms. The gig economy in particular, encompassing short-term on-demand work such as rideshare drivers, freelance contractors, and so on, has been subject to algorithmic management that manages, organizes, coordinates, and even evaluates workers. Given the pervasiveness of gig work, with as many as 55 million Americans participating in some form in 2017, research has focused on understanding how algorithmic management impacts workers as well as how they react to it. A specific focus, though, on how algorithmic management impacts worker well-being has been less explored. Thus, two questions driving our study were, how does algorithmic management affect the well-being of gig workers, and what designs or solutions do gig workers have around how to improve algorithmic management for their well-being? We held focus groups, interviews, and workshops with 24 unique driver participants. We held initial focus groups and interviews with drivers to understand how algorithmic management impacts their well-being, defining it as the following: physical, psychological, and financial well-being, based on the Partnership on AI's framework for promoting workforce well-being in the AI integrated workplace. In focus groups and interviews, we incorporated the use of pairwise comparisons in order to discuss why drivers preferred certain rides over others and understand how these features of the rides impact their well-being. We also asked them to share their perceptions of platform fairness. From focus groups and interviews, we constructed participatory design workshops with workers to design solutions that they envisioned for improving their own well-being. In these workshops, we created a structure to support workers in designing solutions. First, we displayed 1 of 5 prompts about a driving scenario, which was created and informed by focus groups and interviews. Then we asked workers questions to probe how they believed platform algorithms to work, as well as their algorithmic imaginaries, which is how they envision the algorithms should work to support them, to help them start thinking about and sharing their experiences. Next, we assigned gig workers to an intervention so they could consider the prompt through this lens and imagine how a solution could be designed to fulfill their needs. The 5 prompts covered the 5 principles for fair labor platform design, and the 3 intervention types reflected the types of apps and social media forums that drivers currently use for their work. The final outcome wasn't to design the 3 interventions in depth, but to use all of this to generate solutions and analyze the types of solutions drivers came up with. This is an example of one of the prompts, drivers' assessment of work performance and well-being, that they viewed as a group and discussed before moving to breakout rooms to consider the prompt through the lens of an intervention. We structured our findings into 4 problems that we identified drivers discussed and the solutions they came up with to address these through thematic analysis, and we'll discuss a subset of these. We heard early on during focus groups that drivers didn't feel their well-being was supported by platforms. For example, Uber discourages you from taking that long view of the past month or the past few previous months. It does remain very weekly focused. Here, P11 indicates that financial well-being was impacted by platforms structuring work statistics in a way that prevents drivers from understanding their performance in a meaningful way to support long-term financial planning. Drivers also felt they had to forego physical and psychological well-being while working. They often felt pressure to accept all rides that came their way to maintain high ratings on the platform, but it meant things like risking their physical safety and exhaustion. Drivers talked about concerns about carjackings, and female drivers in particular talked about a heightened awareness when driving at night. One response drivers had for this problem revolved around a strong inclination towards having more data-driven insights within the app. They suggested how data analytics could improve well-being, such as making possible the creation of balanced work schedules that take into account the 3 well-beings. Here, P23 and 21 are discussing creating individualized plans that allow them to know optimal times to work and rest, to not be mentally stressed about meeting their bottom line or financial goals, suggesting how data analytics can allow drivers to plan more, avoid driving when sleep deprived, and encourage a work-life balance. Gamification was brought up frequently as a source of unfairness drivers faced on platforms. This refers to methods platforms use to encourage drivers to drive more. Quest is a terminology specifically used by Uber, where the platform will offer different drivers different unequal driving bonuses. In the quote here, P11 explains that quests are presented to drivers inconsistently and based on factors outside of their control. We also heard from drivers that gamification was noted by some as detrimental to their physical or psychological well-being, such as when they're locked into a quest they're struggling to finish because rewards are all or nothing, increasing health hazards of workers overworking. One of the solutions that drivers suggested for addressing unfair differentials on the apps revolved around flexible incentive configurations. Drivers imagine configuring incentive offers they received, whether by switching between quest offers or implementing incremental payouts for ride achievements in order to support a healthier well-being. One driver also suggested being able to customize incentives, alluding to a pizza metaphor where he could choose rewards criteria like pizza toppings that apps like Uber could then weight and rank against their own demand forecasting to determine compensation. The third problem participants identified was uneven information accessed by the platform. For example, P3 says they definitely treat it like it's a perk when it's kind of a necessity. P3 is explaining that platforms unfairly withhold information, such as the rider's final destination, which drivers often use as clues about their safety situation. In their solutions, participants displayed an awareness for the complexities of why platforms may not want to reveal all of their ride request information. For example, P6 recognizes that destination can be used to discriminate against riders, and not wanting to exacerbate that problem suggests platforms provide translucency, such as direction or distance of a destination, rather than the exact destination to still support drivers protecting their well-being. Finally, drivers discussed how inherently their work isolates them from their peers and from their platforms. Our communication network is pretty flimsy and non-existent, and so we don't really have the strength in numbers that you see in a lot of workplaces because we're so isolated. This encapsulates the lack of formal ways to collaborate with one another or receive support from the platform. One of the ways participants viewed for ameliorating this was through a platform or forum for collective information sharing that could serve for investigative or advocacy purposes. P17 illustrates here one way that collective information or data sharing can assist drivers by supporting them to investigate perceived inequalities. P17 has a suspicion that quest promotions become harder to accomplish as drivers get closer to completing it, and imagines how they can leverage aggregated driver data to investigate. Participants envisioned how collective auditing or collective information sharing can allow them to advocate for worker rights by drawing out findings such as this, or even supporting larger policy changes to support workers. Our work explores and presents workers' ideas and imaginaries on how to redesign algorithmic work features to support their well-being. Workers offered realistic and stakeholder-inclusive solutions that mutually align their interests with platform business needs, such as allowing information translucency over transparency to address information asymmetries, or suggesting configurable incentives that platforms can then match to their own compensation models. Second, in discussing their fairness perceptions of platforms, workers identified specific processes where inequities may exist. These can be avenues that HCI and human-centered data science researchers can look to for supporting workers. And finally, our findings offer nuanced understandings of how workers view algorithmic management, fairness perceptions, and platform impact on well-being. We contribute to a growing understanding of the impact of algorithmic management on worker well-being, sharing the ways that workers imagine technology design that centers their well-being and work preferences.